To the microphone. My name's Jeff Mann. I'm a strategist with Tenable Network Security. I'd like to thank Derbycon for letting me speak here this afternoon. If you, at the beginning of the conversation, I will give you my contact information. If you still want it by the end of the conversation, I'll try to remember to repeat it. That's what I used to look like in my younger days. I'm going to try to move quickly through this, especially the early part of my background, because I'm not here to talk about myself, but the point of this talk is really, I've been in the business for a long time, and I've been pondering the last year or so, with all the breaches that are happening and all the vulnerabilities that are being discovered in some trusted tools, how far have we really come? So a little bit about my background, then I'm going to get into where we stand today from a security perspective, why we're failing or why we seem to continue to fail. I will offer a solution, and it's my opinion based on a lot of experience, and hopefully I'm not here to tell you the right thing, I'm here to generate ideas, get you thinking. Feel free to disagree with me, but hopefully it's a discussion starter. And I'll try to allow time at the end for Q&A, but feel free to interrupt during the talk. I've been in the business of information security for about 32, 33 years. I did start the bulk of my career working for the Defense Department at a certain three-letter agency. I have been doing this Internet Information Network data security thing pretty much since the beginning, 20-some years ago. At some point I ended up in PCI purgatory. I ended up being there for about 10 years. So my DoD background is primarily with the National Security Agency. I started out as a cryptanalyst. Actually, I think I have some cool slides here. One of the first things I did as a cryptanalyst at NSA was we had customers back then. The customer was primarily the Army, the military. And these guys that were using secret codes to talk to people that we maybe enlisted that might be citizens of other countries giving us information, they communicated with something called a one-time pad, which is the only 100% secure crypto system in the world. It's unbreakable if you use it correctly. But they had the guys that we were dealing with, the customers, they had these PCs on their desk and they were asking, isn't there some way to do this encryption, decryption thing using this computer? And we decided, yeah, there is. So to my knowledge, I was responsible for NSA for the first software-based cryptographic system that NSA ever produced. We called it a semi-automated one-time pad. Those things in the middle, those are called floppy disks, even though they were actually hard plastic, and that's where the key was. I had another customer that was Special Forces. They used a different type of one-time pad with a different type of algorithm called a Visionnaire Square. It's just a simple substitution table, as you see there. It's the alphabet, 26 different slides. So it's like a Caesar cipher, but 26 offsets. They memorized this thing. This type of algorithm actually translates to something like 123 unique three-letter characters, and they would memorize it. I was working with them, and I didn't have the opportunity to memorize it, but I'd just been through some crypto training classes and learned about cipher wheels. So I came up with a cipher wheel that was actually the Visionnaire wheel. They liked it so much when I would go out to the field, they kept stealing them from me. So we ended up just making thousands of them and shipping them out to Special Forces. So whenever I run into a Special Forces person, I ask them, they told me that they called it the Whizzy wheel. And I always ask them if they have ever heard of it, and then I tell them I was the guy that invented it. I did a talk about a month ago where a guy came up to me afterwards and said, I didn't know you invented the Whiz wheel. I've got one of those. So that was kind of cool. I told him I'd autograph it if I ever see him again. In my time at NSA, I had this thing happen where, and I read this article just a couple years ago in Wired, I think it's 2013, where they were talking about this crypto statue. Has anybody ever heard of that crypto statue? It's in the courtyard of CIA headquarters. And I was reading this article, a group of NSA interns, they were there and they took the code back, and basically Wired had an article a couple months before this saying that there was some guy at CIA that had broken the thing and he'd done it at lunchtime over the years, kind of a pet project. But this article revealed that people from NSA had broken it years before this guy. And I can say I was one of those interns, so I've been mentioned in Wired magazine. Towards the latter part of my career at NSA, I moved over to what at the time was called the InfoSec side. I think they call it information assurance these days. And got in kind of at the ground floor of learning how to do what's come to be known as red teaming, penetration testing, that type of thing. So I was part of the organization that kind of first started developing the methodologies and starting to do that type of work at NSA. Did a little bit of forensics, a little bit of threat detection. And really what happened was I got together in an office with a bunch of guys, and at the time, and it happened 20 years ago, which is why this talk came about, that we went down to visit this place called the Air Force Information Warfare Center. At the time, 20 years ago, they were the primary, agency within the DoD that was doing all this pen testing thing. They set up the first CERT. They were doing the monitoring because the Air Force was responsible for all the networks within the DoD. So we went down there to learn, and I actually gave this talk for the first time back in February of this year in San Antonio, and that's what got me thinking, hey, it's been 20 years. I've been kind of in this since the beginning. I should do a talk based on my 20-year history in information security. Did a little bit of forensic work with one of my customers, which was the Department of Justice. Has anybody ever heard of this website defacement? Remember it? I mean, back in the early days, hackers just defaced websites, and that was it. It was more of like, leaving an Easter egg. I could get here. Look, it's me. I was part of a team that went down there to try to help them figure out, what had gone wrong and who had done it. Of course, the first thing they did was unplug everything and rebuild the servers. So there wasn't a whole lot to do, actually. I left NSA, went out into the greener pastures of the commercial sector, and wanted to do this pen testing thing commercially and try to help customers solve all their problems and be secure. And I was naive at the beginning. I think it was mentioned this morning during one of the keynotes. What happens when we fix all the problems, when we go in and tell companies how to plug all the holes and we're done? What are we going to do? Maybe that's why I ended up in PCI. I was a QSA for 10 years, and I actually had a very unique experience. I was involved with a PCI practice that, for whatever reason, we were the practice that was called in for a lot of the companies in the mid-2000s that were suffering breaches, mostly the Gonzalez ring. The TJX is in there. I was a QSA for them for 6 years. Heartland, they were a payment processor that got popped. I've had a lot of experience going into a lot of different companies. If you look up here, there's banks, there's retail, obviously, there's gas stations, 1-800-Flowers, e-commerce, grocery stores, a lot of different companies, a lot of different corporate environments, a lot of different corporate culture, a lot of different expertise levels, but really a lot of companies that security is not really a core competency. So coming in and presenting them with PCI was really an opportunity to teach security, which is why I do talks these days. I teach about security. So that's my background in the context. I've been in this from the beginning and then some. So where do we stand today? 20 years later. Obviously there's been lots of breaches in the news, vulnerabilities that have been around in some of the tools that we use are being discovered, and they've apparently been there since the very beginning. Social engineering, phishing attacks, there's still shared passwords, there's still weak passwords, there's still default settings. This is stuff that was a problem 20 years ago, and it's still a problem today, which gets me, an old-timer, thinking, gee, are we really we really accomplishing anything as a security industry, as a hacker industry? Are we really making a difference? What has changed? Technology's certainly changed. It's certainly gotten a lot faster. You've heard talks and probably will continue to hear talks about the concept of a network perimeter and what is that these days. There's mobile devices, there's bring your own device, BYOD, there's cloud, there's virtual. There's just so much more going on from a technology perspective, but some of these fundamental things haven't really changed a whole lot. What are the threats today? Why are people doing what they're doing? The bad guys, those adversaries that we're going after. There's all sorts of reasons why they do it, inside, outside threats. Really when it comes down to it, in the early days it was more, hey, can I get there? Nowadays they've figured out how to monetize and make a living off it, make money off of it. Not so, there's some political reasons sometimes, and you get into the whole nation-state debate, and I don't want to belabor that. It's out there as a possible motive, let's just say. So why are we failing? What's going wrong? Based on my years in the business and the experience I've had going to literally hundreds of different companies, I think one of the biggest problems is there's just too many solutions out there. It's a very common saying within the industry, especially from a vendor perspective, that there's no such thing as a silver bullet solution. There isn't. That's what everybody wants. They just want to buy something and set it and forget about it. That's what a lot of companies want. But there isn't really a single silver bullet solution. There's really a whole magazine full of silver bullets that companies have to buy. And this is kind of from a PCI perspective. These are the types of things that you kind of sort of need to have if you're going to approach PCI compliance. So there's really too many silver bullets out there. And there's a problem in respect to companies having an over-reliance on technology because they have to. There was some discussion this morning during the keynote panel about automation and augmentation and what the role is. Well, and they were speaking in the context of pen testing, but that really extends to any security technology that's out there. To what degree do you rely on the automation? I mean, it's necessary, but the over-reliance, the false sense of security, I think is one of the core problems. The other big problem is, and this may sound a little bit old school, but the lack of written policy and procedures, I think, is a huge problem. And if you're looking for a definition of an information security policy, it starts with a goal. I think this was also said, or they kind of set me up nicely on that panel this morning. I believe it was Katie that said, what are you doing? What's your goal? What are you trying to protect? A lot of companies don't understand that. They know that they have to buy a firewall. They know they need an IDS solution. They know they need a SIM solution. They know they need a this. They need a that. They've got to do the compliance thing. And they run around and do all that stuff. But fundamentally, if you sit down and ask them, a lot of people in the company don't really know what it is that they're trying to protect. Well, we have to do a PCI thing. It's got something to do with credit cards. Okay. Yes, it has to do with credit card information. There's other personal information associated with that, also needs to be addressed. So you know what it is, maybe. Do you know where it is? No, we have no idea where it is. So on and so forth. There's a lot of silos within companies, within IT departments, within business units. Show of hands, how many people actually work in some sort of consulting role? A few people out there. Maybe this has been your experience too, but very often when I was going into a company as a QSA and I would have to talk to each and every one of the silos, each and every one of the groups, it was rare that anybody that I talked to understood the big picture of what the company was about. They knew they were a grocery store, so they sold groceries. But in terms of the network architecture, the topology, where sensitive data was stored, where it was flowing, most people didn't know. In fact, it was very common if you talked to the network guys, well, we set up the network and we set up the firewalls, and that's about it. If you talk to the server people, well, then there was the Unix guys, and then there's the Windows guys. well, what's running on your server that you're administering? I don't know. I just keep the OS running. I mean, even talking to DBAs, database administrators. Well, tell me about the schema of the databases. Show me the fields where the data is stored. And they could do that. And they said, well, do you know what this database is about? Do you know what kind of information is on here? A lot of them didn't know. They're like, no, it just needs to be a certain size and accept a certain type of data. So very common for me was I would walk away after spending a week or two at these companies kind of having a better picture of the operation of the company than any one person that I talked to. Unless you found some one guy in the company that's been there, forever, started in the mailroom, knew how to do COBOL programming, so he ended up working on the mainframe and kind of knew how everything worked. But those guys are becoming more rare to find, let's say. So companies don't understand sort of the process and starting from some foundational point of having a policy, having a plan. They focus more on what's the minimum amount of investment we need to make, whether it's buying something, whether it's paying for assessment or consulting services, so on and so forth. There's a lot of reasons why companies don't approach security from a sort of a programmatic perspective. Some of these are here. Some of these slides are just rambling thoughts, and they're mostly to prompt me. And I will make slides available if for any reason you want these later to fall back on. Plus, it's being recorded. What I tried to teach my customers over the years is to help them understand that security, first and foremost, is not a desired state that you get to. It's a life cycle. It's an ongoing process. And you exist as a company somewhere in a process of doing security, if you're approaching it at all. You can argue, maybe some of the stages, but in general, and especially in the early days, it all started with assessment. Where are you? Do a gap analysis. What are you working with? What's out there? What's missing? Especially from a PCI perspective, usually the first pass is there's so many holes, and they go into months of how do we, get to where we need to be, and that next step involves having a strategy, developing a policy. And policy at the highest level is we're going to be secure, we're going to secure this data, we're going to secure our corporate reputation, we're going to secure our website, whatever. It's very high level and it's pretty short. Then you get into the standards. How do we do this thing? And then the procedures is the actual step-by-step. Tied into that closely is the architecture, building out the solutions, and then, of course, you have to live with them, you implement them, you run with it, and then that's when it sort of comes first circle, and you now it becomes more of an audit because you're hopefully measuring against your own policy, your own strategy of how well are we doing what we set out to do? Are we missing things? Do we need to fine-tune it? So, life cycle, it's continuous. It's obviously systematic, and you need to have the policy to kind of make it all work. Anybody know the name Marcus Raynham? Saw him talk 20-some years ago, and he was talking about firewalls and the need for firewalls, and he made a statement that stuck with me. He said, if you don't have a policy, you don't really have a firewall. Meaning, if you don't have something written down as to what the firewall is going to do, what it's going to allow or not allow, how do you measure whether your firewall is working or not? And that kind of stuck with me, and I said, well, that kind of works for every aspect, every part of this whole thing that we're calling security. So really, policy is the key. What is a policy? I've sort of addressed this, already. It's the game plan. It's the way that you justify budgets and spending. It's something that's written down that you can point to and measure yourself against. It's really key to enabling the business. And business operations has to be a part of the strategy as well. This is what you usually see from companies in terms of their attitude about policy, because PCI requires that you have to have things written down, and they're supposed to be reviewed annually. it was very common to go in to do the on-site assessment and get the stack of policies, and lo and behold, the annual review had happened the week before we showed up on site. And 50 documents had been reviewed in one day because they had to have been dated. We knew that there was a game being played. I mentioned the configuration rules for a firewall. That's my Marcus reference. A lot of times the policy, and your companies might be like this, or if you're a consultant, you've seen this. The policy is collecting dust on the shelf type of thing. But it's not meant to be that. And what I'm saying is, policy is necessary, and there's a way to use it and use it productively. You can use policy as a business case. It was very common, especially in the early days of PCI, to go in, and I could make friends with the IT and the security people that didn't like seeing me there anyway because I was that blankety-blank auditor. I could say, look, you know what your problems are, you know what you need, work with me. If I slap PCI on it, guess what? You'll get your budget, because your management doesn't understand and your C-level people don't understand PCI and security, but they know they have to get by this PCI thing. So tell them you need it, slap PCI on it, trust me, the budget will be there. And lo and behold, it was, and I made friends. And then we could have a better discussion about what was really going on in the network. Obviously, having the policy is a way to meet PCI and other compliance regulations. And compliance, it was sort of addressed this morning again. If PCI didn't exist, a lot of this industry really wouldn't be going as strong as it is, and that's the reality. Providing a framework, a way to measure, a way of having understanding, a way of getting everybody in the company involved. These are all things that help justify why you need to do policy, other than it's the right thing to do. And I keep underscoring this. Our focus as an industry is always on the technology, but technology without context is just technology. There's just more to it than that. Obviously, policy is not popular. It's not popular to write things down. It's much easier to just make things work. And if nothing's going wrong, everything's okay. This is not new, but this is neglected. The positive spin of why you need to have a policy, a strategy, is to take into account the whole business operation, take into account the whole corporate culture. I have never seen it work effectively where there wasn't management buy-in. Too often I've seen there's a lot of rules in place, but the rules are kind of ignored by the admins or by the C-level people. From the simple, the CEO's secretary does his email and has his password, on down the line. The sacred cow being the administrator gets to do what he wants to do because he's got the keys to the kingdom and he can do what he wants to do. That's gotta be transcended in order to make it really work. It also is key for getting all the employees of the company, no matter what level, no matter what role, to sort of understand how they are fitting into the big picture. In my opinion, that's the only way you begin to defeat social engineering, phishing exercise. If you get people to understand, their little insignificant role that they think they have no impact on the company really does have an impact. So what they do really does matter. So, in some sense, the question to start out with, whether it's in your own company or if you're working for other companies, is try to pinpoint where you are in this life cycle. So, I have a confession to make. Everything I've just presented to you is verbatim from a presentation that I put together in my first commercial job 18 years ago. Tenable made me put together these slides and dress them up and make them prettier, but word for word, they're the same. So stop and think about that a minute. I've given you 18-year-old information that's still valid today, and it's still daunting today. And really what's scary is when we used to present this idea of the security life cycle 18 years ago, we were talking in terms of 12 to 18-month life cycles. But the reality today, the way technology is moving, is this life cycle repeats itself in months, if not weeks, sometimes days, maybe even hours. It's a moving target, and it's really fast, faster than this old guy can keep up with. So what really needs to change? Understanding that you have a problem, it's like that first step to getting past the problem. That's really key. Getting past the fact that a lot of companies don't really care about security. Security is not a core competency. And there's a lot of companies out there, and especially in the PCI world, they have not nor never will have dedicated security staff. They might have IT staff, and then they have to do double duty. But within our industry, we sort of envision a certain organizational structure that every company has, and that's how you do security and do it right. The reality is there's many companies out there that don't have that, never will have that, which only compounds the problem. Our security industry is largely vendor-driven, and I'm saying this as a vendor, but vendors lie. I used to hate vendors when I was a consultant. What I've learned now that I am a vendor is that vendors aren't always lying, and a lot of them do lie. But sometimes and often the vendors aren't any more well-informed or aware or clueful than anybody else that they're trying to sell stuff to. They repeat the buzzwords, they repeat the marketing phrases, but they don't really understand the context, so they don't know that they're off just by this much. The silos create lack of ownership, lack of responsibility. There's lots of finger pointing. I've been seeing that. I've spent 10 years not going to hacker conferences, and I've been coming to them over the last year or two now that I'm outside of the bubble. A lot of finger pointing, but I think there's a need for introspection as well as finger pointing. Be the solution that you want to be, type of thing. Silos, stovepipes, it's not my problem, it's somebody else's problem. And then you get this whole, well, we're in the business to make money at the end of the day. A lot of us work for companies that are profit driven. And this is especially problematic when you're a consultant or an advisor or an architect or an engineer working for a product or a vendor. And the recommendation for the solution magically is the thing that you're selling. So there's oftentimes this built-in conflict of interest. There's this mindset, and it's warranted to some degree, that we want solutions. We want those silver bullets. We want to buy something, turn it on, it's working, and we don't have to think about it, so we can move on to something else. I would like to say and suggest, because I work for a vendor that sells solutions, that there really are no such thing as solutions. There's only tools. And the tools are only, again, this was referenced this morning at the keynote. Tools are only useful if they're being wielded by people that know how to use them. There was an analogy made, I forget who said it this morning, they were talking about, do you want a house painter or do you want someone that can paint a masterpiece? Where that analogy fell short is there's a whole much more demand and need for house painters in the world than there are people that can paint a masterpiece. But the point is knowing how to use the tools that you have. But there's a significant need for people that have a basic awareness and understanding of how to use the tools. Not sure where that goes. I just didn't completely agree with their analogy. I mentioned earlier that the traditional view of network security, and I was having a conversation outside a little while ago, the idea that you build a castle wall, you build a fortress, and you put all the stuff that you want to protect inside of it, and then everything on the outside can't get in. And that whole mindset, that whole sort of paradigm of how network security works is kind of going away, has gone away. Because, where is the perimeter these days when you have so much technology in the cloud, so much technology that's virtual, so many business critical applications that are running on personal devices that are going in and out of the network? I mean, I work from home. How many people work from home? You're part of your corporate network if you happen to VPN in, but very often you're connecting to, your mail, your whatever. It's all cloud-based, your business applications. So where is the perimeter? So again, what I believe is the solution, and it's not sexy, and it doesn't mean there's some new shiny thing to go out and buy, it begins with defining the problem. If you're your own company, working for a company, if you're a consultant or an advisor, you can tell this to your customers. Figure it out what it is you're trying to do. Figure it out what it is you're trying to protect. Is it data? Is it reputation? And in making those decisions, and this is really the definition of a risk assessment, you have to make some value judgments. How much are we going to invest in the protection of this, the protection of that? And how much are you just going to have to, sort of deal with and absorb? The education and awareness, I can't come up with a better solution than everybody needs to be smarter at all levels of the organization, in all levels of the industry, about what the real risks are, what the problems are, what the challenges are. This community knows really well what can go wrong and what can be done and what can be exploited, but there's millions of people out there that don't have access to this and never will. They're not going to hire it, they're not going to bring it on. But they have the same problems that they're trying to solve. And there's a lot of people outside of this community that are still within what could be loosely called security that care about these things and are trying to do the right things and are trying to make an impact. In that sense, I think, I said it before, I'll say it again, the assigning blame to others, that's really easy, especially when you're in a group of your peers. Oh, it's developers. We don't have secure code. Yeah, that's true, but there's more to it than that. What can you do to change things? What can you do to make the changes? And a lot of that starts with education and awareness. Don't assume that the person you're talking to understands the world the way that you do. Don't assume, even if you're telling them, that they have a clue as to anything you're saying. I've been giving this some thought. I'm actually trying to develop probably what will be a training course, and just trying to teach people, because I've been doing this for a lot of years as a consultant, speaking to lots of different types of people, having to read them, having to try to understand the language they speak, having to learn to speak their language on the fly, explain complex concepts, things that we don't necessarily think are terribly complex. We take it for granted, but they look at us like we've got snot coming out our nose. They have no clue what we're saying, but explain it in a way that they begin to understand it. Painting pictures, using analogies, speaking their language, trying to put together a course that kind of helps to teach us that know the answer, how to communicate that answer to other people, all types of people. First and foremost, I've been saying this for years, security is a verb. It's something you do. It's not a state. It's not some place you get to and you're done. But a lot of people want that, where they want to buy something that gets them there and they don't have to think about it. I don't have intimate knowledge, direct knowledge, and I know Krebs came out with an article in the last week or two about what was going on at Target. I suspect, and I haven't read the details of his article, but I suspect that there were numerous multiple failures. And what it appears is, because Target used to have a reputation of being one of the better merchants that actually had a pretty solid IT staff, they had a dedicated security staff, they invested heavily in technology, but I think they fell into that trap of we've got all these silver bullets so that we're okay, rather than continuing to monitor and look at and realize the kind of information that was at their fingertips. They kind of assumed that they were okay because they had this great panacea of this false sense of security because they had everything. Obviously, that didn't work too well. So in terms of, where do we go from here? And this is meant to be just to get you thinking, and hopefully approach this whole conference with, thinking twice about everything you're hearing, or how can I, expand and rethink this and look at it in a different direction. I've seen it already today. There's a severe need for humility. Calling the people that don't know what you know stupid or dumb, I don't think is appropriate. Because you need to be able to speak to them, because often they are the ones that hold the purse strings. They're the decision makers, and it's on you to help them understand. There's more to it than pen testing and hacking. This is an important component, but there's a larger business problem. There's more things that go into the whole package that helps a company be secure, whatever that is. The best way to learn how to communicate to others is to first listen. Some of this is like basic, like if you've had a speech class in college, it's persuasive speech. But, education and awareness, we all need to be teachers because we know more than the next guy. Teach them. We know more, we don't know what we know. Find out what the next guy knows. They might have something to teach you as well. Everybody likes to talk about security being a game. I prefer to think of it as a puzzle. Puzzles tend to have solutions. There might be more than one solution, but there's a solution. And I'm not talking just about the technology, but going into a company and having to learn what the corporate environment is, the corporate culture, being in a room with a group of people and learning what the power structure is, learning who's really in charge and who are the influencers in a group. That's something that, it's part art form, I think, but I think there's ways and techniques that you can learn to try to figure that out so that you can read the company and give them the recommendations that are tailored to them. It's a communication skill. If you are or in a capacity of advising, you've got to be trusted, and so you need to be trustworthy. You don't usually gain trust, again, by calling somebody stupid or snickering at them if they ask a stupid question. Ask stupid questions yourself. I used to play dumb all the time. Explain this to me. I don't know how a router works. Oh, let me explain it to you. Then I got a lot of juicy information about how the routers and the networking worked at that company. It's a great little technique, and it's not a stretch. Perfect security is not an end game. It's not the desired state. It's a process. It's ongoing. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Certain amount of paranoia is good, but you can go overboard with it. Some of these are just rambling thoughts. But the overall goal is, there is no such thing as perfect security. The best thing you can do is monitor the crap out of everything so you detect early when something happens and minimize the damage. That's really the goal. Questions, pushback, feedback, heckle. Anybody? Yes, sir. Is there a microphone for questions?
Speak louder. All right. How much of the issue do you think is a result of one and one? So that would not have to spend more time to show that you did the job.
I don't think the issue is so much the compliance, and I'll speak mostly from PCI. It's not, the issue is not the PCI standard and what PCI requires. The issue more so is the way that the industry has allowed people to game the system and do the bare minimum just to get a checkbox. So weigh that against the good that PCI has done or compliance has done in terms of, 10 years ago when I got started in PCI, my first customer was a payment processor, one of the rather large ones. And there was credit card information everywhere. There was sensitive authentication data, the 3-4 digits, by the millions in router log files, because somebody would turn it on for troubleshooting and never turned it off. I mean, it was everywhere. In every company I went to, data was everywhere. The accounting department, the finance department, they wanted to do a database query to get some information about a transaction the previous week. So the most convenient search item was the credit card number. So they would use that as the search criteria. And they didn't know how to do, efficient searching. So it was just easier just to dump down all the data and put it on their laptop, put it on their share drive. I've been to too many companies where the credit card information was everywhere. So the game at PCI has become limiting scope, which means you segment the network, which means you isolate your card data environment. You can argue that segmentation is security in depth. That's a good concept. The game has become, what do I limit things to so I don't have to bother with PCI? The benefit has been they've had to understand how their network is working, how the data is flowing, and limit it and isolate it and clean up their mess, basically, and get it down to as few places as possible. So there's been a huge benefit to that. Companies that I've been to recently do a lot, or lo and behold, they find out they don't need to keep the credit card number at all, and that makes everything go away. There's pros and cons to that. There's certainly a way that it's a large way that compliance has been gamed, and that contributes to the problem. But again, the root cause, I think, is the lack of education and awareness. Having a QSA or an auditor come in and explain, this is why this rule exists. This is why it's important, this is why you should take it seriously, and this is how you should do it, rather than, just show me something and I'll check the box. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Could you comment on difficulty or ease, perhaps? I think it's difficult to family ROI.
Yeah, that's a really tough question. The question is, can I comment on coming up with ROI for solutions? The real trick is if your company hasn't been broken into and experienced a loss or experienced a breach, you must be doing okay. But there's no return on that, or you don't know. Unfortunately, it's sort of an inverse. You know how expensive it is when stuff goes bad and how much that costs. But it's really hard to convince most people, how much they need to invest to prevent that from happening. There's all sorts of formulas out there, and, determining risk and stuff like that. I've had CEOs and CIOs and CTOs that I've talked to over the years, where you ask them, well, do you want your company's name in the newspaper? Or, sorry, I'm old school. Do you want them on Krebs? Do you want to be the next article in Krebs? And they're like, well, no, of course not. And I said, well, how much do you want to spend to prevent that? What's appropriate? There's really no right answer to that. Another question?
Yeah. I wanted to ask, what is your advice for overcoming compartmentalization of organizations as consultants?
Start talking to people. Put yourself out there, because you're probably in the middle of it. Lead by example. Don't wait for somebody else to do it first. And you might get the door slammed in your face, euphemistically, rhetorically. But start doing it. That would be my advice to you. Yes, sir.
Policy standpoint, do you think that do an aspirational we think that we should have all of this accountability 10%, or every policy just be the 10%?
Well, again, in the classical sense, the way I was trained on security was you develop a policy which is a sort of a 10 Commandments, thou shalt. We're going to do this, we're going to do this. Then you come up with standards that say, this is how we meet this policy goal in this environment, in this platform, in this operating system, or, this application or system. But even then, it's still kind of high level without the details, but, begins to drill down, and then the highest drill down is the actual procedures. We're actually going to use, this encryption algorithm. We're going to use this key length. We're going to, this is how we're going to do key management, and so on and so forth. So it kind of builds. So the idea of not being able to tackle it all really goes up to the, figuring out what the problem is and, what are the absolutes. In some ways, it's all a risk management thing. What are you going to do? What are you not going to do? If you think you can't do it, then what are your alternatives? And usually the alternative is know what's going on your network, monitor. Maybe you can't stop everybody, but at least try to detect if it's happening, if that makes any sense. And I'm not saying that just because my company does monitoring, but maybe I am. I don't know. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
What are we doing as an industry, as practitioners, better than we were doing 20 years ago? Have we made improvements?
That's a question to talk over a beer or a bourbon. I think there's a lot of us that are smarter, but I think there's a lot of us, by no fault of our own, especially if you're newer to the business, we older people don't always teach the historical context, the meaning, why do we do things a certain way, why is this good, why is this bad. We just kind of latch on to, well, things have to be this way, things have to be this way. One of the other talks I've given has been about penetration testing. I used to do penetration testing. I stopped for two reasons. One, because the guys that I did it with were better than me, and I remember the day when we were at a site and I found a few vulnerable X servers, and so I was capturing keystrokes. And I showed it to the guy I was with. He says, "Oh yeah, I wrote a Python script. I've found 90 servers that have been, and I'm monitoring them right now." So okay, I'm done. But the main reason I stopped was because I got bored. Because like many people that are pen testers, you'll hear this. You find vulnerabilities that should have been fixed. You shouldn't be getting in with a default password. You shouldn't be finding a default setting. You shouldn't be finding something that was turned on that shouldn't have been turned off or was left on. Or you come back 6 months later, a year later, and even though you told them how bad it was, it's still there. I decided there's got to be a different way to go about doing this, especially being hired to be a pen tester. Pen testing is a very expensive, inefficient way of doing a vulnerability assessment. There's scanning technology that does that. It's where PCI is an interesting framework. PCI assumes that you build secure networks, you build secure servers, you've hardened everything, you've securely configured everything, you've got patching programs in place, you've got monitoring in place, then you run the scan. You shouldn't find anything. But our industry kind of leads with the scanning, leads with the vulnerability assessment. And that's tied up in pen testing as well. And I'm not talking about pen testing that's hacking, that's breaking stuff. I'm talking about pen testing that usually ends up finding vulnerabilities, that there were other more efficient, effective ways of getting to that point, especially if somebody's paying you to do it. Did I answer your question at all? Yes, no? We'll talk more over bourbon. Any other questions? In the back first and then up front. I'm hoping I'm retired in 18 years. I really often sometimes wonder if we've gotten any better. I mean, the technology changes, we plug one hole, but a new one pops up. And there's sort of this built-in, everything that exists in technology these days is designed to be seamless and fast, information sharing kind of publicly from wherever to wherever. And, oh, by the way, we're supposed to secure it and protect it. So there's sort of this built-in, it's always going to fail kind of thing. So probably I could give this talk in 18 years. I'll update the slides. Yes, one question, and I think it's about time to wrap. Yes, sir.
So I guess my question is, like, what have you seen as far as, I'd say in the last couple of years, every pen test that I've been involved in was completely unnecessary.
Right.
And the reason why I say it is when you look at a lot of the companies right now that are looking to flash type solution, they're like, well, our system can be broken into. It's like, well, what real difference does that fucking make if you have, do you even know what your system, like, they're seeing it as one big system rather than, well, that's another system, this is another system, that needs to be protected a particular way, this needs to be protected a completely different way, just because all of these are whatever servers, doesn't mean that each one of them has to be protected the same way.
Right.
I mentioned that one, this one, that component, and this whatever else are all never subject. So you look at that, they check off their boxes, and it's like, well, you look for me to get in, I got in, but what difference does that really make? But that was the data that really, it's that risk factor, right? Like, this risk could cause this much damage, therefore you buy the insurance for it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
they're doing it as one big component, which is completely useless.
Well,
You see as far as like accepting that change and understanding that.
pen testing is largely done for the wrong reason, and it's largely ill-defined. I have this whole other talk that's been recorded, and it's out there somewhere. But pen testing, time and time again, is really a form of vulnerability assessment, an inefficient and expensive way of doing vulnerability assessment. What pen testing should be, and again, they mentioned it this morning, pen testing should be imitating the threat. You've closed all your holes. You've done everything you can to patch and lock everything down. Then hire the pen tester to come in, because in my experience, especially in the DoD, implementation is where things fall apart. And that's what needs to be tested. But the implementation can only be tested by impersonating the threat. And it's not a matter of finding other vulnerabilities. The other point I'll make is, if you're doing pen testing, your pen test report finding should not be, I found a missing patch. This system was not patched. That's not the finding. That's the symptom. The finding is, your patch management process is broken. Fix it, because I found a box that wasn't patched. You understand the difference?
I think the problem is the controls that they say, well, this isn't patched or whatever. That's it. Here's the control for this. But the issue then becomes a drop in productivity for something that did not need that control whatsoever to solve something else that wouldn't have hindered productivity for the general whole for this one component.
Right. Well, that's a whole other discussion of how patches get implemented without breaking the application. But our time is up. We should allow the next session to come in. Thank you for your time.